Jamie Dornan's 50 Shades era, an emotional retrospective, 5 years later. 5 years is not a long time in the life of a person, but it is an eternity in the life of fame. In that span, reputations can be rebuilt, narratives rewritten, and moments that once felt inescapable can soften at the edges. And yet, some eras do not fade cleanly. They linger, not as spectacle, but as echo. For Jamie Dornan, the 50 Shades years remain such an echo. Not because they define him entirely, but because they marked a profound turning point, professionally, emotionally, and existentially. 5 years removed from the phenomenon of 50 Shades, this retrospective is not about controversy or box office tallies. It is about the quieter aftereffects, the shifts in posture, the recalibration of privacy, the unspoken feelings that never made headlines, and the subtle narrative of longing that continues to resonate beneath the surface. This is not the story of a man trapped by a role. It is the story of a man changed by an era, and what happens when the noise finally recedes. 1. When a role becomes a world. The 50 Shades phenomenon arrived with a velocity that few careers ever experience. Overnight, Jamie Dornan was no longer simply an actor, he was an idea. A projection, a symbol contested and consumed by millions. The role demanded more than performance. It demanded endurance. Every interview carried the same questions. Every public appearance was filtered through a singular lens. Even silence became content, the boundary between character and actor, already porous in the best of circumstances, thinned to near transparency. At the height of the phenomenon, Jamie learned a difficult truth. When a role captures the public imagination at scale, it does not end when filming wraps. It follows you, into headlines, into assumptions, into rooms where you are known before you are met. 5 years later, the emotional residue of that experience is still visible, not in words, but in restraint. 2. The cost of constant visibility. Fame is often described as exposure, but exposure suggests a static state. The 50 Shades era was something more invasive, sustained visibility under intense emotional scrutiny. Jamie was expected to be many things at once: confident, provocative, reassuring, self-aware, unbothered. He was expected to answer for a character's choices as though they were his own, to navigate cultural debates while remaining palatable, to be present everywhere while protecting something essential inside himself. The emotional toll of this balancing act was rarely discussed openly at the time. But 5 years on, the signs are clearer. In later interviews, Jamie's tone shifted. His answers grew shorter, more considered. He became less interested in explanation and more invested in boundaries. Where he once met curiosity with openness, he now met it with calm deflection. This was not withdrawal, it was adaptation. 3. A quiet recalibration of public persona. If one traces Jamie Dornan's public presence from the height of 50 Shades to the years that followed, the transformation is subtle but unmistakable. There is less performative charm, less eagerness to reassure, more stillness. He speaks now with the cadence of someone who has learned that not every question deserves an answer, and not every narrative needs correction. His humor remains, but it is drier. His warmth remains, but it is more selective. This shift is not cynicism, it is discernment. The 50 Shades era taught Jamie that public personas are elastic but not invulnerable. Stretch them too far, and something essential risks tearing. 5 years later, he appears committed to keeping his intact. 4. The private life that had to withstand the storm. While the public saw a phenomenon, Jamie lived a life that did not pause for it. Behind the noise were ordinary commitments, family rhythms, personal relationships, quiet routines that do not translate well to headlines. Maintaining these during a period of extreme attention required an emotional compartmentalization few ever master. There were moments when the outside world seemed louder than the inside one. Moments when assumptions traveled faster than truth. Moments when connection, real, grounding connection, had to be protected fiercely because it could not survive public interpretation. 5 years later, what stands out is not what was revealed, but what was preserved. Jamie's private life did not become a counter-narrative to the 50 Shades story. It became an anchor, and anchors, by nature, are unseen. 5. The whispers of connection. Every defining era leaves behind a mythology, half facts, half feelings, sustained by memory and imagination. The 50 Shades years were no exception. There were whispers of connection that extended beyond the screen. Not declarations, not confirmations, just the persistent hum of something unresolved in the public mind. Chemistry mistaken for intimacy, silence interpreted as secrecy, distance read as denial. What matters, 5 years later, is not whether those whispers were accurate, but why they endured. They endured because the era itself was charged with intensity, emotional, cultural, symbolic. It was an experience that required trust, vulnerability, and sustained emotional presence. Such experiences leave traces, even when they end cleanly. The narrative of longing that continues to resonate is not necessarily romantic. It is human. It is the longing for clarity, for meaning, for something real beneath the spectacle. Jamie has never fed that longing, and in doing so, he has allowed it to mature, from speculation into reflection. 6. Unspoken feelings and emotional afterimages. Some experiences cannot be processed in real time. They demand distance. 5 years removed, Jamie appears more comfortable acknowledging, not publicly, but implicitly, that the 50 Shades era was emotionally complex. Not traumatic, not regrettable, but formative. There is a difference between enjoying a moment and surviving it. The latter leaves deeper grooves. In his later work, there is a noticeable gravitation toward characters who wrestle internally rather than externally. Men defined less by dominance than by doubt. Performances that favor interiority over display. These choices suggest an actor who has already lived at the center of a storm and is now more interested in the weather inside. The unspoken feelings of that era, pressure, responsibility, restraint, have not vanished. They have been integrated. 7. The narrative of longing, reframed. Longing is often misunderstood as desire for what is lost, but it can also be a yearning for understanding, for a chapter to be seen clearly once the dust settles. 5 years later, the longing associated with Jamie Dornan's 50 Shades era feels less like nostalgia and more like inquiry. What did it cost? What did it give? What remains? What remains is not the role itself, but the knowledge gained from inhabiting it under extraordinary conditions. Jamie's current public presence carries a quiet authority born of experience. He does not chase validation from that era, nor does he disavow it. He lets it exist as part of his history, important, but not dominant. That balance is rare. 8. Living beyond the phenomenon. The true measure of an era is not how loudly it announces itself, but how a person lives after it ends. In the 5 years since 50 Shades receded from the cultural foreground, Jamie Dornan has built a body of work and a way of being that feel intentionally grounded. He appears more interested in longevity than momentum, more invested in substance than sensation. The phenomenon did not break him, but it did teach him what he values. Privacy, integrity, emotional clarity. These values now shape his choices more than any lingering association ever could. Conclusion. What endures, 5 years on. Looking back, the 50 Shades era stands less as a defining identity and more as a crucible, an intense period that revealed limits, strengths, and truths that might otherwise have remained dormant. 5 years later, Jamie Dornan does not seem haunted by that time. He seems informed by it. The whispers of connection, the unspoken feelings, the subtle narrative of longing, they remain not as open wounds, but as afterimages. Evidence that something meaningful once passed through his life and left its mark. And perhaps that is the most honest legacy of the era. Not the spectacle, not the controversy, but the quiet transformation that followed. Some chapters do not need revisiting to be understood. They simply need time. 5 years was enough.